up? The Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas. Thanks for joining me, guys. Today we got Brian Tuohy. He's been on NBC Sports Radio, The Artie Lang Show. Recently, he's been on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, their podcast, and they have a really cool YouTube channel which has bunch of historical stuff and conspiracies and really interesting. Ben Bolin, one of the hosts of the show, has been on this podcast a long time ago. I can't remember when exactly he was on, but it was one of the earlier shows. Really cool guy, really nice guy. Till this day, probably one of my favorite conversations I had. Just, we have a lot in common. We seem to think alike, and just a really, really cool guy. So definitely go back in the archives, check out the episode with Ben Bolin from Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. He's also been, and I'm talking about Brian Tuohy, he's also been on Coast to Coast AM, InfoWars, Dan Patrick Show. He's been on tons of sports radio shows, and the reason that is because he wrote the book To Fix Is In, Larceny Games, and The Season Abyss, and he's the leading expert. And it's funny because we all call him the leading expert, but it's because there's not many, if any, other people who really put this much work and effort into looking into sports fixing, corruption, conspiracy, the mob's influence in sports, and all that type of stuff. So I won't bore you too much with his background or any more of what he writes about. You'll learn a lot about what he does and what he thinks and what got him motivated into looking into this, all on the show. We had a really awesome conversation. Sometimes you just have guests on that just really easy to talk to, and he's one of those guests. I mean, he's just so knowledgeable, has so much to say, and really has well thought out opinions on things and statistics and facts. So a really fun guy to talk to. So enjoy the conversation. We had a blast talking, and hopefully you guys will be happy to see that there's a second podcast out not too long after the last podcast. And I know that prior to these two podcasts, we're on a little bit of a out of nowhere a hiatus. So I'm just glad to be back rolling and back doing these shows. So hopefully you guys enjoy this conversation. Remember, on our YouTube channel, you can find links to all our guests' website work, his Twitter account, his website, which has tons of information and tons of good stuff. So definitely check that out. And also, you can support the show by rating the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen to the show. And also, you can purchase Theory 6 music, which is a theme music throughout this podcast, and you can get that anywhere. You can get MP3 downloads, so definitely check that out, and the links for that will also be on our YouTube channel underneath the show description, so check that out. And that's it for now. I'll keep this short and sweet because it's kind of a long conversation, long a podcast, so enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. What's up, Brian?
Not too much. How are you?
Hey, thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. I know it's a Labor Day weekend. A lot of people have shit going on, so I'm glad that you took the time to come on the show. I've been kind of busy with. I know you've been busy. Every time I've contacted you, had something going on. You've had your wife had surgery recently too.
Yeah, she just had surgery about 10 days ago on her wrist. So
how's she doing?
She's doing all right. The problem is it's a right wrist, and of course she's right-handed. So
you do everything.
I help her do pretty much everything, unfortunately.
Yeah. I just had my second child Monday. I had a daughter. I have a son, a year and a half year old, and so I'm kind of helping my wife do everything too because she had a C-section. So I'm on the same boat for different reasons. But yeah, same boat. But it's it's hard. I mean, it makes you put things in perspective, like the idea of like people doing things for you. It's like we're so used to being independent that once you're dependent on other people, it's not a good feeling. You think it sounds nice, but once you actually can't do the everyday things you do every day, it does psychologically. I think it has an effect on you.
Yeah, it's fun for like 24 hours, and then it's like, no, I'll just do it. I just want to do it myself. And like, she can't. I mean, she's not supposed to like grip anything or grab anything with that right hand, and she naturally wants to do things, so I have to constantly stop her, say, just don't do it, I'll do it, take care of it, that's why I'm here, just let me do it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, some of those, I mean, the women, the good ones, I don't make them like they used to, but the ones, I mean, my mother's the same way, my wife, luckily, she's the same way, and I mean, they just constantly needed to be doing something, and if they're not, and usually, and guys, I don't know if you played sports growing up, but I was always active and doing something. So same thing with injuries. If I get hurt, I never gave myself enough time to recover because, once I start feeling a little better, I was going crazy not being able to, move and do stuff that I jump into lifting weights or exercising or playing basketball or whatever way too soon. And then the injury doesn't fully recover. And then next thing you know, you have a nagging pain in your elbows or whatever that nags around for forever because you didn't want to give it an extra 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatnot. So I'm guessing you getting into the subject of sports, and it's funny because sports is kind of a topic that I don't talk too much about on this show, besides, some mixed martial arts, and my co-host, Dave, he's a big Patriots fan. We're from Massachusetts, so he's a big Pats fan. But we've talked about this quite a bit with friends of ours because we have quite a few friends that are big hardcore sports fans. And I've said something that you've repeated over and over again, and it has to be true, this idea that in soccer, the biggest sport in the world, if there's known corruption and known fixing, why isn't there more and more scandals, or any scandals really, in the 4 major sports in America? Like, it just, either they're doing a great job covering it up, or they do, and then once I found out about your work, I'm like, well, this makes perfect sense. So how did you get into it? What's your past? I mean, were you a sports fan who was upset about seeing some things that looked like fuckery? It didn't seem like things were making sense, or how did you get involved in researching this?
Well, I was a sports fan for a very long time. And I mean, even to an extent now, I mean, I still have to follow sports because of what I do. But I think what it was as I got older and more cynical, I stopped believing in coincidence, and coincidence always benefiting the league and benefiting the teams the league seemed to like, or that the media seemed to be, presenting more and more often. And the more I looked at it, and the more I started doing some research into this idea, because there was 2 books that really influenced me. One was called Interference by Dan Moldea, which talked about numerous games being fixed by organized crime and gamblers in the NFL. And this other book called They Call It a Game by Bernie Parrish, who used to play in the NFL in the 60s. And he wrote about how when TV bought into the NFL, it seemed like TV actually took over the sport and started controlling the sport. And this is a guy who played in the NFL and who's still active with the NFL Players Association to this day. He's like 90 years old, but he's still at it. And after reading those 2 books and kind of putting things together, I said, I think there is more to this. I don't think it is coincidence, because these are major businesses, multi-billion-dollar industries, and I can't believe that they just leave that up to chance. And once I wrote my first book, The Fix Is In, and saw kind of the reaction I got and what would happen when I went on sports radio and that sort of thing, I realized nobody else in this country is even coming close to pursuing this subject matter at all. So I decided basically to fill that void and really just go after it, and that's been the primary area of my research for the past almost 10 years now.
Do you think nobody looks into it because it's almost like telling somebody that Santa's not real? It's like one of those things where, like, we all, or even WWE for a better example, it's one of those things where it's like even the adults that watch it's like they know it's fake, or they know it's it's theater, but they don't like being told that. Is that one of those things where, like, you're ruining something they enjoy, or they feel like you're ruining something they enjoy? Do you think that's part of it?
People tell me that all the time. I ruin sports for them. That's even my wife. I mean, she's like, "You just ruined this for me. Thanks." But I think that's what it is. I think they understand they are being entertained when they watch whatever sport it is they choose to watch. But I don't think they really fully think it through as to what that would mean if it is entertainment. And I mean, the NFL has argued before the Supreme Court, of all places, that they are entertainment. They are not 32 individual teams. They are one entity known as the National football league. And I mean, I think that should go a long way to get people thinking like, wait a second, these aren't 32 teams that are really battling against each other. The owners, the people who control the sport, recognize that they're not fighting against each other. They're really all in it together, and their business is entertainment. And there's multiple quotes I found from other leagues and other people who repeat this same mantra that it is just entertainment. And when you think of it as entertainment and realize that there's no law that stops it from being entertainment and no law that stops them from fixing their own games because they are entertainment, then I think you should start putting things together, be more alert as a fan, and realize what you may be watching is really just great theater.
And you research obviously the big four in America. I mean, I'm guessing you've also researched soccer, boxing, MMA. Now that MMA has become much more mainstream in the last 5-10 years than ever. I mean, have you looked into also MMA and see if, I mean, obviously there's, and that's the thing. Like, I think the important thing you're saying is we have to remember it's a business. And I haven't talked sports much on this show because a lot of times I'm trying to spark conversations about things that people might not know about, geopolitical stuff. I've had ex-CIA Ray McGovern on. I've had Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Jesse Ventura on. I've had people to talk about current events and kind of like expose things in a way that's like, listen, things aren't always what they seem, and we have to realize that people aren't out for our interests. And I think sports is the same thing. Like, we have to remember that we're much more loyal as fans as they are as sometimes team owners or as league presidents, and their only purpose to exist sometimes is to make profit. I mean, you assume, and I mean, I know sometimes we look at corporations as one thing, and then we look at like the NFL as another thing or the NBA as another thing. But like you said, they're there to make money, and you see it in college sports. I mean, young players come out or go to college. People are coming out to see these young players who are eventually, some of them are going to make it in professionals, and they're out to see them. But yet the jerseys are making money, the college is making money, the coach is making money, everybody's making money except those players. So obviously they don't really care about making things fair or sharing the wealth or anything like that. It's a money grab. And so yeah, I think that's a huge issue. What is there any case that got you initially, or anything that stuck out that like, okay, I got to look into this. This really got my attention, and this is the first like real case that you looked into that got your attention? And is there one specifically, or anything any league specific that you want to look into first?
Well, the NFL was the one that really kind of sparked my interest in all this, and I think it was based off of those two books that I mentioned previously. And I think it was right after that the whole 9/11 event took place. Then the Patriots won the Super Bowl after 9/11, and that whole patriotic symbolism that went on with that same Super Bowl right after 9/11, that really kind of made the light bulb go off. And already before that, I'd been writing and talking about this, but that's what really, I think, was kind of the tipping point for me and sent me further on into this path. And it's funny you bring up the fact that, it seems that out of all the things that you could talk about, like you see all the politics and other things that go on, sports doesn't seem to really matter. And it's funny because even when I was doing research into the FBI and their investigation into game fixing in this country, they almost came to the same conclusion in a way, that because they had a hard time proving these things as being true because there was no concrete evidence, even when they're talking about college kids fixing games for gamblers and that sort of thing, it was all under the table dealings. If they couldn't get a wiretap or someone to confess, which would have been confessing to a federal crime, without that concrete evidence, they couldn't get arrests and then convict people. So they almost basically quit and realized, look, we got more important things to do. And at about that same time, Reagan had tasked the FBI with fighting the war on drugs. And so really, there's like four entities that should be on the lookout for this. One of the main ones is the FBI, because it is a federal crime to fix a game through bribery. And yet the FBI really doesn't look into this anymore. And I mean, the other entities like the sports media, they're in bed with the major sports leagues. The sports leagues don't have any incentive to investigate themselves. And basically fans just allow this to happen because no one tells them that this is a very real possibility, that there may be games being fixed because of organized crime and gambling, and there may be games being fixed because the league wants certain games to go certain ways to promote certain teams and players. And so I think without anybody willing to kind of do this job, it just completely gets overlooked.
Yeah, and you talked about the whole patriotic thing. one thing that's hilarious is how taxpayers' money actually goes into funding. Like when you see these jets go over a stadium, during the national anthem and stuff like that, the Pentagon actually pays for this stuff. It comes out of our pocket. We pay the team or the league. I don't know who gets the money. I'm guessing the league for basically doing these ceremonies, these nationalistic ceremonies, which is crazy because obviously that's the thing that's hilarious about taxes is that they get so mad at you if you don't contribute, but yet we have no say in where our monies contribute to. So it just it drives me crazy.
And the money too goes, don't forget, a lot of times to these stadiums that these teams are profiting in. A lot of times, like I live in Wisconsin, and we have a new Brewers stadium that was built not too long ago, and we're going to have a new stadium for the Milwaukee Bucks, and it's all taxpayer funded. Yet the fact of the matter, the guys who own the team have enough money to build their own stadium. They just don't want to invest the money into doing that. So they tell the city, hey, give us this money. And the city, through its taxpayers, for some reason always do, despite the fact that economists have looked at this time and time again and seen that really there is no benefit from having these teams within their cities. It'd be fine if the Bucks left Milwaukee, if the Brewers left Milwaukee. It wouldn't really affect Milwaukee, but yet there's a psychological thing that says it would. But really, economy-wise, it wouldn't. But yet here, taxpayers are spending millions upon millions of dollars to build these stadiums, and all the profits then go to a private entity.
So I guess, because I was thinking, I'm like, while you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, all that extra foot traffic you get in the city, but really people are going directly to the game, and all that money's going directly to the team. So really,
they've done research that, like when the Colts left Baltimore, and other teams have left town. Basically, the people who went to see football games then spent money going to like live theater or going to the opera, or they would spend their entertainment money on something else that's entertaining. It was just a transfer of money. It didn't mean then when the Colts came to Indianapolis, it didn't mean there was this huge influx of money coming into Indianapolis because the Colts arrived. It actually then started affecting the other areas of entertainment because people would spend less on going to the theater and then spent the money on the Colts. That's the way these things worked out. So there was really no benefit. And a lot of times I found there was actually a negative benefit for the places around the arena. They would actually go down because, like you said, people would come in to see the game and then immediately leave, and they wouldn't necessarily hang around and benefit the immediate properties that surrounded the stadium.
Yeah, and I know that they, I guess they get some tax money, and then stadiums owners are always kind of saying, oh, well, if you don't pay for, fixing up the stadium or for a new stadium, we're going to leave the city. And then, it ends up putting the city in a bad situation. They end up paying for something, then always being, threatened with this, we're going to leave bullshit. So, and then, they end up being scared and so the taxpayers and the people who live in the city end up paying for a multi-trillionaire to get a brand new stadium, it doesn't seem fair.
No, one of the best examples of that, which my favorite, is on HBO Sports a couple years ago. They did a thing about the Miami Marlins and their new baseball stadium. And basically, the Marlins fleeced the city of Miami out of, I think it was like $300 or $400 million because they could afford to build the stadium, but they basically showed them fake financial records that said they couldn't. So it convinced the board in Miami to get the taxpayers to fund the stadium. And after all this came out, HBO Sports did a little investigative piece, and they talked to some representative for the Marlins, and the HBO broadcaster was asking me, like, who gets the money for tickets, who gets the money for parking, who gets the money for this, who gets the money for that, and all the money was going to the Marlins. And the HBO guy finally said, well, what's Miami get out of this? And he said, well, they get Marlins baseball. And I just thought that was hilarious. I'm like, that's not a fair trade. No. Marlins baseball, first of all, is terrible. But second of all, you're getting all the money. They spent all the money to build you this stadium, and all they get is some baseball games. They don't even get free tickets, for crying out loud, or free parking or free hot dogs. They still have to pay to go see your lousy baseball team. But that's the way it goes.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. It's all about money. Look at what happened with UFC 200 recently with Brock Lesnar being put on the card because he was going to save the card, and they wanted to make it a huge, big deal. But yet they, USADA couldn't test him or get the test results in time before UFC 200, so people knew there's he potentially could be on steroids, which he did end up testing positive for steroids or some. I guess I don't know if it was specifically steroids, but something. Yeah, or something. I think it was. I think, I don't know if it was another estrogen blocker, if that was his case. And I think the thing about estrogen blockers is that they assume if you're on estrogen blockers, then you're probably on steroids, because when you're on steroids, your testosterone levels go down, because your body, that's why they say your balls shrink, because basically your body stops producing it, your balls make it, and then once you get off it, your levels are so low, and then you need a testosterone booster and estrogen blocker to make sure your hormones get back to where it needs to be. So they just assume that that's what it was. So it's a banned substance, not necessarily a performance enhancement, but it's a banned substance, which you should know what the banned substances are, because I know USADA puts it all on their website or whatnot. But my point is that that the UFC obviously did not care about if he was going to pass or not pass this test. It was all about, and then unfortunately Mark Hunt, who he ended up fighting, it's a sport that's very dangerous. You can obviously get hurt. It's less dangerous than boxing, but still, you still can get hit in the head at a significant amount of times. And Mark Hunt, he could have easily got some brain damage or whatever, and UFC cared more about making this card great and getting this fight to work than they cared about this guy's health. And Mark Hunt, he's obviously very angry about it now, but he did say before the fight that he's like, oh, I bet you he's on steroids, and I don't care, I'm still going to kick his ass. So, I think that kind of bit him in the ass a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's still kind of dangerous to put a guy in who you don't know is or is not on steroids. And obviously, look at him. There's a pretty good chance if he's not on them, he's been taking them at some point in his life. And to put him in the ring, and then, that somebody could possibly really get hurt. And you see this over and over again. I know in the NBA, I don't know the specifics, but I know for a long time they weren't testing for marijuana because they knew everybody was smoking, right? And I don't know how. So how lenient are they with like the NFL? These guys are obviously on steroids. I used to lift weights a lot, and I'd see guys that were enormous, and I've never saw a guy who was as big as some of these NFL guys who didn't at one time take steroids. And I saw it in my local high school. I'm from a little town outside of where the Basketball Hall of Fame is, Springfield, Mass. And I'm right from outside there in this little town, Ludlow, the suburb, and kids in my high school were doing steroids, and they weren't getting, huge scholarships and going to big colleges or whatever. So you have to assume at some point, these athletes are, really how they perform could affect how much money they're making and their career and all this stuff that they're doing it. And when you see these NFL players and you see how fast they are now compared to what they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and they keep getting bigger and faster, to think that they're not on steroids, I think is ridiculous, And what's your opinion on all that? Are they too lenient? Do you think that they're purposely letting these guys fly under the radars? Do you think does one league do it better than another?
Well, I think the drug testing policy is really a PR campaign. That's how it really started, was with the NBA in the 80s, because so many of their athletes were doing cocaine. I think the number was, I forgot, there was one famous LA Times article that said something like 75% of the NBA players are on drugs. And street drugs, we're not talking performance enhancing, we're talking marijuana, cocaine, whatever. Like 75% of them were on drugs, and the NBA reacted by installing this drug testing policy, and they had to get it past the players union. And they still, to this day, all the leagues have to kind of get it past the players union, because the union supposedly is there to help protect the players. But I think this whole testing policy is a PR campaign, because, the league can determine what's legal, what's not legal. They determine when players get tested. They collect the samples. They test the samples. They get the results. Now, none of that is public. It's not made public. If the league doesn't want to make it public, it doesn't have to be made public. So there could still be 75% of the NBA on street drugs. And who would know? Because the NBA knows, but that doesn't mean they have to make that stuff public and release it to everybody. So I think that's one way they can actually control athletes if they want to, is through this drug testing. But I think for performance enhancing drugs, like you say, players are stronger, faster, bigger than ever before. And yet, like in the NFL, players complain about, we have to worry about concussions and these brain trauma and this sort of thing. Well, if you're all taking steroids, you're really damaging each other by making yourself bigger, faster, and stronger than you should be. And you're more likely causing more concussions and more brain injury, because you're impacting each other harder and stronger than humans necessarily should be able to do. And at the same time, I was told by a member of the Football Writers of America about, I want to say it was probably 3-4 years ago now, that at least 75% of the league was on human growth hormone. And that's a lot. That's a big number. And yet when the NFL made human growth hormone, HGH, illegal and started testing for it, it was about, I think, a year and a half ago. And to this day, not one player has tested positive for HGH in the NFL. So I think right there that tells you that the testing policy really isn't effective. I think occasionally they do catch guys because some players are just dumb. But I think when, the teams are informed literally like 3 or 4 days ahead of time when testers are going to show up, especially in baseball, because they have to get them parking passes and passes to enter the stadium and that sort of thing. They can inform the players, hey, look, they're coming to test. And it gives them time to clear the system or mask, the drugs that are in their system. And so none of them really test positive unless they're dumb or, are just really, really taking these things. So I think it's more ubiquitous than the leagues want to say. But at the same time, I don't think fans care. Because I think fans, they were happy to see Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa hit all those home runs. They're happy to see basically superhumans performing on the field of play because, again, this is entertainment. And I think the leagues and the owners are fine with the players doing whatever it is they do to their own bodies because it helps make it more entertaining and makes fans tune in. And to them, again, bottom line is business. So if it's bad, like when Barry Bonds broke the home run records and fans kind of revolted against that in baseball because they knew he was taking something because he was just not normal, they revolted. Major League Baseball made a change. And now the number of home runs every season has been dropping since then, But that's only because they saw that there was a threat to their bottom line with that overtness of Barry Bonds. But in leagues like the NFL, because, records aren't being shattered like they were then, it doesn't matter to them because fans are still tuning in. They're still happy to see what it is these athletes can do, whether they're on drugs or not.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely agree. I think that a lot of it's just so the fans believe, like you said, it's PR. It's this idea that, okay, it's a safe sport, so you hope that it doesn't turn any fans off or whatnot. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just PR, and it's just trying to tell. Football. Everybody kind of knows. Anybody who watches football and thinks that they're all natural, or any of these guys would pass drug tests. Yeah, you get the quarterbacks and kickers, people who would pass a drug test because they're not, they're not the most athletic person on the team. Well,
part of it too is, I think a lot of people forget steroids isn't always necessarily for muscle building. A lot of it's actually for recovery.
Oh, HGH by itself isn't muscle building. Your body naturally produces it. They give it to kids when they think they're going to be shorter to help be an average height, and that's literally all it does is help with cells. It helps with cartilage, helps with everything, just recover. It doesn't actually help with steroid, or it doesn't actually make you physically stronger. Yeah, build muscle. Now, if you mix it.
That's the thing, though. You think at the abuse NFL players take, or the abuse Major League Baseball pitchers take, you use these drugs not necessarily to get bigger and stronger all the time, but you use it to help recover. So when it's your turn to play again, you feel good and can play. So it's not always about getting bigger, stronger, and faster. It's also about recovery and being able to always perform so you don't get, pulled out of the lineup because you're injured. Even if it's something minor, you realize, I think, as a player that your job is always on the line. And if you don't get out there and perform when they need you to get out there and perform, you're going to be out of work and potentially out of the league, and that ends your dream. So there's also that motivation, too, I think, to take the drugs.
Now, with that said, what's your opinion on HGH? Because I've kind of have I go back and forth, just debating with myself about if it should be legal for athletes or not. Because in a way, if you took only HGH, all it would help with is recovery. Some of these football players, they don't get guaranteed contracts. It's not like baseball where you have long careers and they get these long, big multi-year contracts, or even basketball, they get paid very well. But when it comes down to like MMA, or if it comes down to boxing or football, something that's more physical, you're more likely for you to get hurt. These guys, they get hurt once, and then there goes their career. There goes a big portion of maybe their youth where they could make a decent amount of money. And if HGH could help, and it doesn't necessarily make them a faster, bigger athlete, I don't see anything wrong with that. What's your opinion on it? Do you have an opinion on?
I think I fluctuate like you a lot in the same way too, because to my opinion, anybody, if you want as a person want to do these drugs because they'll help you in whichever way you think they'll help you, I don't know why you shouldn't be allowed to do it. But I think what it comes down to for me in a way is that, if they made all these drugs legal and allowed players to do whatever they want, fine. But I think what then is going to happen is it's going to, like you say, you saw it in high school. It's going to trickle down to college, and it's going to trickle down to younger players, and they're going to say, well, if my hero is doing this and he's openly, even sponsoring, some sort of drug company that provides these substances, well, then I think I'm going to take them. And I think, you can damage a young body by doing some of these drugs, especially if you don't know how to do them or how to properly use them and that sort of thing. You don't have a doctor's support like a lot of these athletes do. Then that's where I think the problem sinks in. I mean, I think an adult, if they're willing to take these risks and use these drugs and do what they want to their body to make more money, in my opinion, fine. I don't really care about it. But I think, again, it's going to spread out from there. And that's where it kind of makes me leery, is that I think younger athletes are going to try to emulate those players and do those same sort of things and just not have the proper support and know how to use them, and then cause problems. But otherwise, I mean, I don't care what they take.
Yeah, performance enhancement is kind of a blurry line, like what is and what isn't. Because I mean, obviously, having a coffee before this show makes my brain spark a little, faster. There's protein helps with recovery, creatines, amino acids. There's a lot of things that help performing in general, performing better.
Yeah.
So it's just like, where do you draw the line? What should be legal and what shouldn't be. So yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely open for debate, and there's a lot of but like you said, when it comes down to something that a teenager can do who might not think so far in advance of his life or career and think like, okay, well, doing this now might make me bigger, stronger, or whatever, but it's going to kill my liver, or it's going to, that's like even like oral steroids. One of the worst things you can do for your liver. And I remember kids in high school, and when I was at the gym I would work at, people were taking Dianabol and I'm just like, you guys are going out drinking this weekend, and you're like, it's just, to them, it's just like, and it's like we were all 18 and 17 at one point where, we felt good. We could get, yeah. So, you could go out, drink all night, and wake up the next morning and still feel all right. So, you just felt like, oh no, I'm going to feel like this forever. Nothing's ever going to catch up to me. And so it's hard to snap kids out of that and think like, hey, and this stuff's going to catch up to you eventually, so. Yeah, that's definitely one of the dangers. You talked about head trauma a little bit. That's another thing that seems interesting, because I know a lot of football players who are suing the NFL or have sued in regards to, we didn't have this information. It's like, you didn't think two guys running into each other at full speed was going to cause head trauma. And the other thing too, I have a hard time believing that if they knew at the time when they were at the peak of their career and they're playing, they're making all that money, that, oh, hey, we have this information now that says this could cause these long-term effects. How many of them would actually drop out? How many of them would stop? If that was true, then why isn't there this a huge amount of players dropping out now that it's public knowledge and everybody knows how dangerous it is? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Well, it's funny. There was a book written, again, early 70s by a player. Dave Megacy was his name. He played for the Cardinals. He was a linebacker, I believe, called Out of Their League. And in that book, he talked about being dinged, as they called it. And they still call it being dinged today to a certain extent. But basically having a concussion. And like in two or three spots in the book, he talked about how he got dinged in the game, and he would, his vision was blurry and he was throwing up, and yet he would still like try to get back out on the field and play. And one was it appeared to really affect him for like 2 or 3 weeks. And one of the reasons he quit the game was his physical well-being.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah,
that's weird, because like I said, I didn't do anything.
That's so weird. Yeah, for some reason, all I heard was like distortion, and I didn't know what it was coming from. But then when I signed out of Skype, I messed around with a bunch of them. I'm like, I can hear everything fine, and then even Skype sounds fine. And when it's ringing, it's just once it makes the connection, I heard the distortion again. But for some reason, it sounds fine now, and so I guess we can continue. I don't know if you want to have the video off for now. Just never mind. That's fine. I guess while it's working, take advantage of it.
That was weird, because I could see you like talking and nothing was coming out.
Yeah, and it's weird. And the signal seems, at a regular strength. It doesn't seem. That's weird. I mean, I've done so many of these interviews that I've had so many weird things happen. Skype, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. For the most part, it's pretty reliable. Is that what you usually use? You use Skype?
Actually, I tried using my phone because of that, because I have had enough problems with Skype where like this. It would just cut off and disappear for who knows what reason, but I've never had a problem with my phone. So
And
a lot of
do you
times
use Skype on your phone, or do you use another app?
No, I mean, I use just a regular phone for my Skype app.
Oh, you mean just a cell phone? Like okay, yeah.
I got actually, when I was on Coast to Coast AM a couple times.
Yeah.
First time I was on, they demanded, not asked, demanded I have not just a landline but a corded phone, like an old time phone to talk to them. And luckily, my mom had one. We still had a landline in the house, and my mom had a corded phone, and that's what I used. And apparently, that's the best signal you can get.
So how do you? Well, you call in them. Yeah, I was going to say because from my perspective, I'm like, if I had a landline, how do I record my side of the conversation? But yeah, that's well. So would you use a landline as a backup, or is that what they wanted you to call them using?
That was the main thing they wanted to use.
Oh shit! Maybe they wanted to have that AM sound. You know.
Could be.
Yeah.
But then it was like when I was on Alex Jones had to have Skype. That's what they wanted. So
yeah,
everybody's got their own thing for their own reasons.
Yeah. I've had people ask me like, "Oh, do you want to use this?" I did my 100th episode not too long ago, and we just used Google Live, and I know you can do or YouTube. We use YouTube, and you can stream live, and them and Google are the same thing, so they use the same software, and it's like the Google Hangout thing, and you can just everybody who has a Google account can sign on, and you can chat and do a whole like chat room type thing. And that seemed to work pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's whatever you're comfortable with. Skype it's a free service, so I think everybody hopped on there. If you have an iPhone, a lot of people use FaceTime with iPhones, so yeah, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you end up using. Yeah. But yeah, I think a landline probably is the most, I mean, because you don't have to worry about connections. You don't have to worry about, so you just have to worry about somebody still having one, because I got rid of my landline recently too, because it's just, I'm like, what's the one? I never used it,
No, the only calls I get on my landline are basically solicitations for this, that, or the other thing. It's not anybody actually calling me to talk to me, except my mom. My mom still does.
Yeah,
but no, it's just because of radio interviews, because it sounds apparently to them the best. So,
what time were you on Coast to Coast? Was it some ridiculous time?
Oh yeah, because I'm in the Midwest, so I was on from I think 1 to 4 in the morning, live. I mean, they do it live, so you got to sit there. And the best part is, which I never really knew until I did that, is they don't talk to you in between time. You just sit there and listen to the commercials when the commercials are on. So you're doing this radio interview, you're like, we'll be back, in 5 minutes or whatever. And it's not like the producer comes on and tells you anything or says, hey, we're going to ask you about this, or you chat with the host. You just sat there and listened to their commercials until the show came back on, and then away you went. It was kind of weird.
That's funny, because Alex Jones doesn't do that. He usually talks to. How does he?
No, sometimes they'll kind of tell you and say, "Oh, this next segment we're going to do this or that," but it's not like a conversation. It's just a little quick thing. But then you do hear the commercials. But it's just funny.
It makes sense. If they have a question coming up and you have time on your hands to kind of prepare for it, why not let you know in between the commercials, so that way you have a little bit more time mentally to prepare for what your answer is going to be, or remember anything you want to bring up. Yeah, it is funny how Coast to Coast is huge. It's amazing how many people have been on that show, how long it's been around, and they've gotten much better with, because my father-in-law, I remember him telling me, I think he ran into some guest that was on my show that was on Coast to Coast. I don't know if it was Gregory A. Smith or Jesse Ventura or whoever it was, but I had a couple people who've been on, and he's like, oh, that guy's been on Coast to Coast, and I'm like, you listen to Coast to Coast? He's like, oh, I've been listening to Coast to Coast for a long time, and apparently a lot of people who work at night, literally there is nothing else to listen to, fell in love with the show, but it's gotten much more serious. No, I can't say serious because I don't want to offend anybody. I don't care about yeah. Well, I think before it was a lot of UFOs and ghosts and stuff like that. Now they talk more about like topics that your expertise in, and the big pharma and corruption and things like that aren't so far fetched. And those other topics are fun, but I think that there's so much real stuff that we can prove that it's like, I don't know how much time and effort I want to spend talking about some crazy lady who says that she died and met Jesus or whatever, it just. But
I run into that too. So doing some of these podcasts and whatnot is some of these guys who are really conspiratorial bent. I'll be talking about the sports thing and the fixing and how I can, you figure these things out and what have you. And then I get a lot of like weird, like out of left field questions, like, did you ever think about the symbolism within some of these logos and how that and I'm just like, what is that? If it is true, I mean, maybe it is true, because I don't study symbolism and numerology and these other things that some of these people get into, but I'm just like, I'm talking about something that's really pretty concrete that, you can see on your TV every day when you watch a sporting event where, instant replay can show you one thing where a guy's out of bounds and yet the referee will tell you he's in bounds, and, this sort of real world stuff. And then you want to bring in this really kind of out there ideas. I'm thinking, why are you doing that? I mean, is that really the segment of your audience you want to go to, or would you rather just kind of stick with what's more realistic and concrete? But yet a lot of the times these things will come up and I just kind of have to be like, that's just not my area of expertise. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think there is something sexy and mysterious about like conspiracies. It's trying to discover the unknown and stuff like that. But I definitely think it turns some people off, because what ends up happening is that you end up being categorized as a conspiracy theorist. And even though it shouldn't be a bad word, because it just means, I mean, conspiring, you can be charged for conspiring. I mean, it's so there's, Well,
that's what, because I've been like, somebody interviewed me for the website called Vocative, and they labeled me the king of sports conspiracy theories. And it's funny because I used to call myself America's leading expert in conspiracy theories, sports conspiracy theories. And I realized, what I really am is a skeptic. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a skeptic. And I think people hijack the word skeptic, because there's magazines like Skeptical Inquirer, I think even one called Skeptic. And when you look at those magazines and read them, the people who write the articles, they're not skeptical of the main story. They're skeptical of the people who are quote unquote conspiracy theorists who are questioning the main story, and they attack those people. They're not skeptical of the mainstream media. They're not skeptical of the main story that's being purported by the government, whoever else. They're skeptical of the conspiracy theorists, who are really the ones being skeptical, because they're not believing what's being fed to them by mainstream media or whatever else. And that's like me. I'm being skeptical of the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NBA, who said, these games are 100% legitimate. We're not influencing them in any way. And I'm saying, no, I don't believe that. And yet I get called a conspiracy theorist, not a skeptic. And so, like you say, I think that drives people away. So like, he's a conspiracy theorist. He's talking about, craziness. He's talking about UFOs or whatever else I might not believe in. And now I'm lumped in with that group. And that doesn't do well, because a lot of the things that I'm talking about are very provable. It's just all the little points I put together, A, B, C, D, E, and F, I can't prove G, but a lot of my evidence, indicates that G really is the answer, and that is that these games are being fixed. But because I can't prove it definitively, then I get lumped into this group.
Well, we can't prove gravity exists definitively. Yeah. I mean, everything's almost a theory. I mean, a lot of science is theories that we kind of accepted from, people, and, it's they come with a conclusion. They look at this, they look at that. So the things that can proved, and they think that this evidence leads to this outcome, or we assume it went away now. That's so weird.
I could hear the white noise too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so weird. I just,
like I say, it's all on my Kindle. It's all built in. I mean, there's no cords or anything.
Oh, that's right, because they have just a microphone built into it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's causing it. That's weird. Or maybe it is something on my end. Then I'll figure it out afterwards. I did a podcast yesterday, but I mean, randomly you just have issues sometimes. So.
Also, I work at a music store. We always have to deal with that. My guitar's making this weird sound, but it only makes this weird sound if I do this. Well, don't do that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't repeat it. Yeah, I don't know where that comes from.
Are you a musician, or?
I wouldn't call myself a musician. I play the guitar. I can fix a lot of instruments, but musician's a strong word, I think.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm kind of the same way. I've been playing guitar for a long time, but I've never really when you see, you know, I grew up, I'm a huge Maiden fan, and me and my brother played in a metal band and stuff like that, and there's all these great musicians in the metal genre, and I'm like, I'm definitely not that, you know, so I'm like, you know, so I'm like, it's hard to call myself, I always called myself more of a songwriter or a producer than a musician, and that's actually how I started the podcast, because I had all the equipment, and I'm like, oh, I already have microphones and mixing boards, and I'm like, you know, I'm halfway there to starting a podcast, so, but all my music for the podcast and everything, this podcast is named after one of my songs, A Ripple Effect, but, you know, so the song kind of spawned the podcast, because music just took forever to release and stuff, so I was trying to do music that was more meaningful, that had more thought-provoking themes and stuff like that, but then by the time you release it and all that stuff, it's like, I'm like, a podcast I can get out like that, and if I really want to, you know, start a ripple, for a lack of a better term, and really try to provoke thought and try to, you know, get people to look at these different topics and subjects in different ways, then it's much easier just to do a podcast. Talking is just much easier. But what type of music are you into?
I've always been into like heavy metal and that sort of stuff.
Nice. What any artists that you like? Like any, you have a favorite? Are you a Maiden fan? You like Iron Maiden?
No, I was never a big Maiden fan.
How dare you?
I was more like Van Halen.
And,
Motley Crue. I was a big hair metal type of guy, and
nice.
That's kind of my genre.
Yeah. You still listen to some hair metal?
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah, all the time. I'm going to see Steve Vai in a month.
Oh, one of the greatest guitarists ever. Yeah. Great guitarist. Yeah. It's that's the thing. Like, even though like a lot of that hair metal stuff got kind of made fun of, and they're still great musicians. I mean, that's the thing you couldn't take away from them. I mean, they had even after doing all that coke, I mean, they were still doing solos and getting zero sleep. You know, they were still. I mean, it was amazing how. I mean, because metal is just one of the harder genres of music to play because of the speed and because of the how technical it is and all that stuff, and you know, and the singing, you know, hitting all the high notes and stuff like that. You know, so it's pretty amazing how much they partied, and you know, and I'm sure I'm saying this because I wasn't living in the '80s going to a show where like Motley Crue sucked, and I'm like, oh, these guys aren't performing well at all, you know, but yeah. But yeah, it's music. That's one thing I love about this podcast is I get to have anybody on I want. So I have musicians on, and I have, you know, and it's amazing how like musicians are just musicians, comedians, authors. They're some of the most interesting people to talk to. You know, like anybody who really analyzes stuff, analyzes themselves. Music, I think that's a big part of it, is like you spend a lot of time analyzing yourself when you're writing and trying to figure out your point of view on something or your perspective. So in a way, it's almost like therapy, you know. So, and I think when we listen to music, we do the same thing. We listen to music and you know, it talks about something that's like, oh, I never thought about it that way, you know, or you agree with it and you're like, oh, it kind of makes you self-reflect a little bit, which is so important, you know, especially in a time, and bringing back all around in a time like this. And I think that's why sports is so popular, because I live in the East Coast, and well, I mean, I was born in Portugal, so soccer's huge, and so you know, I know all about fanatic fans. But in the East Coast, it's just as crazy with our Red Sox, and so I'm, you know, a huge basketball fan. Celtics is I'm a huge Celtics fan. That's probably what I watch the most is basketball.
On a Dallas jersey.
I know. Well, I'm a big Dirk Nowitzki fan. Being born in Europe, you know, I like to support my European players. I like the way they play. You know, I like the fact that most of these guys are pretty likable on the court and off the court. You know, Dirk Nowitzki's always been super respectful. Always seems like a really nice guy, and I like that. You know, I really appreciate that. You know, the Steve Nashes, Arvydas Sabonis. You know, these guys who really just seem like good guys on and off the court. I mean, I get a lot of shit for this from my friends, but I hate Allen Iverson. I think that I hated his attitude. I hated the fact that, you know, I just hated his just, it was all about him all the time. And you know, you hear stories about him after games taking personal jets or planes to the casino, gambling, and then showing up right before game time again at the next game. You know, it's just like, you know, I mean, I guess it's easy for me to say, okay, if I wouldn't do that. I mean, who knows? I mean, if I was Justin Bieber and I was that age, you know, with that much money and resources, maybe. I mean, we all fucked up in our teens and early 20s, and we didn't have money. You know, at least we didn't have that type of money. Imagine if we did. You know, so sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I'd be even worse. But I really appreciate the guys who keep it together and have money and have success and are grateful for it, because unfortunately there's a lot of people who do have to go to work every day and do have to work paycheck to paycheck, make ends meet, and I think that's why sports are popular, because especially in the East Coast, like I was saying, people come home from a long day of work, or like Sunday, because we're so busy. Like Sunday's perfect. The NFL, the reason it's so, personally, why I think the NFL is so big in America is because it's perfect for American lifestyle. You spend all day working, you spend all week working, and then we'll give you Sunday. We'll give you Sunday, and Sunday you can relax. So you finally get to escape from the stresses of everyday life, and you get to watch football, or Monday night you get to watch Monday Night Football, and you get to kind of just forget about everything and forget. And so in that sense, like, I appreciate sports, because I remember even myself, like, just first time, working, I started working full time right out of high school, and it was just like, fuck, man, this sucks, man. Is this it? Like, this is going to be the rest of my life. And I look forward to, like, oh, I can't wait to get home to watch the Celtics game, or, so it gave me something to look forward to. But I think sometimes we can get so caught up in sports that we forget there's bigger issues and more important things. And these people who are putting together these games really don't give a fuck about us. We're being loyal as hell, going to the games and buying the merchandise, and yet they could care less about us. And you see it with the loyalty with players. I mean, you have to like a team. You can't like a player, because usually a player doesn't last one place for too long. I mean, you see it with LeBron James going to Miami, and then now that Miami's not looking too good, it's like, oh, I want to go back to Cleveland. I love Cleveland. So it's So what's your yeah?
I was gonna say, fans. That's part of it. Is, I mean, it's almost like a drug sports, and they've even done studies where they call it basking in reflective glory, where a person will attach themselves to a sports team or a player, and when that team or player does well, they feel good because of it. And you can see it all the time. You can hear it all the time. You listen to sports radio, and people call it and say, we need to do this, and we need to trade this player, or we need to make this move. And it's like, you're not part of the team, buddy. Okay, it's not we, it's them. But because mentally you associate yourself so much with that team, you think of it as we, Cubs fans. We might get to win the World Series this year. We might get to do that. Well, no, you're not a team. If they win the World Series, great for the Cubs, and you as a fan will get something from that. But you're not part of the team. You're not winning the World Series. And that's, I think, what sports and team owners and the leagues can get away with a lot of things because of that mentality within the fandom. And I think, like you say, because they just want to escape and they don't want to think for 3 hours while they watch a football game or a baseball game, that fans can be duped. And I think that's a very real aspect of it, is that because you're so caught up in other things and you want to believe in the reality of what sports is you forget that athletes, coaches, referees are people. And they have problems like people. They have drug problems. They have gambling problems. They have problems with, their family. They have problems with women. They have problems with men. They have problems. And, as organized crime has taught us over the history of it, if people have problems, there's ways to exploit those problems to get people to do what you want. And if you have all these athletes, you have all these coaches, you have all these referees, someone has to have a gambling problem among all of them. A lot of them probably have drug problems. I mean, there are problems within the leagues that the leagues can keep quiet because they're such partnered with the media that they can keep these things under wraps. But the fact is, those problems can be exploited. And if fans don't want to think about it that way, don't want to think about the guy who's out there playing, wearing a helmet, might be afraid that he is going to get a concussion or he is going to get brain damage from playing football, so he won't necessarily play as hard, and that's going to cost the team a game. I mean, there's a lot of ways that games can be influenced and manipulated, and it's because I think fans just put on that fan hand and don't look at it rationally and understand all the underpinnings within these sports and within these events that can be, taken advantage of by the powers that be within these things. I mean, you look at the NBA, I think the best example of this is game tanking. Every sports writer will admit probably that NBA teams tank games at the end of the season to potentially get better draft picks because of LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. One player can literally make a difference for an NBA team. So they will tank games. But nobody understands, well, how does that happen? Because the players are the ones who are actually tanking the games. They're the ones not playing well. But it's not their decision to tank the game. It's coming probably not from the coach either, because a losing coach is going to lose his job, which means it's coming from the GM or the team owner who's directing everybody to not do well so they can lose a game. Well, that's a fixed game. That is flat out a fixed game. That's a big game that's being manipulated. Yet sports writers will write about it like it's no big deal. Oh yeah, they're tanking some games because they're trying to get a better draft pick. Well, that's a regular season NBA game. If that's technically meaningless, then by that definition, who's to say a playoff game is meaningful? Who's to say that's not meaningless because they, instead of being a 4-game sweep, they want to make it a 6 or 7 game series to make it more exciting because it sells more tickets, more advertising, more TV ratings, more profit for the league in the long run. I mean, that's the thing, is if you don't think about it on a certain level, then it allows them to get away with more and more things. And that's why I think this has all just become basically like a grand soap opera. And it's a soap opera for men to follow. And it's about the only thing on television that you need to watch live, because you can't DVR a game and watch it later, because usually you find out the results before you get home to watch the game. So, I mean, that's, sports has taken it to that level now.
Oh, absolutely. And there's definitely business decisions going on behind the scenes. I mean, I don't know if it was Bill Simmons' book or whose book I was reading, where they talked about one guy was actually better than the guy who was starting. So the guy on the bench was better than the guy starting, but they drafted the guy, that's starting, or they gave him more money, or they gave him a big contract, so they're kind of forcing him upon the team. So there's all these strategies going on. So it's like there might be a GM who maybe drafted a guy, like I said, drafted a guy or paid a guy big bucks, and he's not panning out, and there's a better player on the team, but he's not getting playing time because I gave this guy all this money. So it's just like there's all these business decisions, people trying to keep their jobs, people trying to make more money, all these strategies. I mean, I think the popular one, wasn't it Patrick Ewing going to the Knicks? That was, the lottery pick thing, how it just can be
first draft lottery that was, I'm almost guaranteed, was rigged to get him on the Knicks, because that was the best business decision for the league to make. You had a guy who was pretty much a can't miss prospect, and they were right about that. And he could have wound up in New York, or he could have wound up in Sacramento or Seattle or somewhere else. Well, where would the league want him? They'd want him in New York because it's the number one media market. It's one of their legacy teams. That's where he would do the best. So I think they rigged that draft lottery to ensure that the Knicks got the number one pick and could take Ewing. And I mean, I think that's the same reason actually the NHL. I believe the NHL manipulated the trade that got Wayne Gretzky out of Edmonton and put him in LA, because he wasn't doing the league or anybody really any good playing in Edmonton. So they organized the trade, got him down to LA, and it really helped hockey blossom in the southern part of the United States by putting him down there. I mean, it was a good business decision. And I think that's where you have to look at a lot of things in these sports is, a team may go 16-0 in the NFL, and a team may go 0-16 in the NFL, and amazingly, they're going to make about the same amount of money. Whoa. Oh. That's pretty well. They're making about the same amount of money because of the revenue sharing. And so because it is such a business thing, if they see the New Orleans Saints is a good storyline after Hurricane Katrina and that team comes back and makes something of themselves and goes on to win a Super Bowl, well, that profits everybody involved. So I think that's, these are all business decisions, and that's why I think fans have to look at it as a business, and the business is entertainment.
Oh, yeah. Even I have a buddy who works at ESPN, and I remember when the Jeremy Lin craze was going on, and I remember we had a little get-together, and I'm like, dude, will you guys stop talking about Jeremy Lin? And it's funny because he's like, you think these guys on Mike and Mike, and you think these guys on these ESPN radio shows, like they're just casually, they want to talk about Jeremy Lin this much. But that's not the case. Like, even that's fake. Well, they were pushing it and saying you have to have. Oh, apparently we just need to keep hanging up and starting over.
Yeah, apparently.
But like I was saying about Jeremy Lin, yeah, the thing about Jeremy Lin is that they had a designated amount of time that they needed to talk about it. So they were forced to, and the reason why was because every time they talk about Jeremy Lin, or you see it all the time with LeBron James, there'll be a playoff hockey game, or Tim Tebow, hasn't done shit in forever, and it was never even, outside of college, never really accomplished much. Well, that run with the Broncos, but so the thing is that they purposely will talk about certain topics, which will bring eyes, because then they can sell marketing time. Oh, look, we can put these many eyes on our TV or listening to our radio show, and so we're charging you this amount for your commercial, so everybody's making money. So it's even the casual Mike and Mike conversation, which isn't casual because every 5 minutes they're like, hey, we're brought to you by blah, 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 but you think it's a freestyle conversation like you and I are having right now, and just we're talking and whatever, but it's not. Like, they have almost like a script, and even that's scripted.
Well, and that's the thing is, a lot of fans don't realize, the NFL is funded by the major media. ESPN gives the NFL almost $2 billion a year for Monday Night Football. They spend $110 million on every Monday Night Football broadcast just to give you the game. That doesn't count paying the announcers or the camera crews or anything else. It's just $110 million for the rights to show that game. And I mean, the Fox gives them $1 billion. CBS gives them $1 billion. The NFL doesn't exist without that media money. And it goes the same with, Major League Baseball makes, I think, $3, $4, $5 billion from the media. NBA makes a bunch of money from the media. The media funds professional sports these days. And if you don't think, like you said, that an outlet like ESPN, it's funny, I could hear the white noise too coming through sometimes.
Really? Yeah, I wonder what it is. Yeah.
See? Landline phone. No
yeah,
problem.
we probably should have done that. You're right. I actually, the nice thing with Skype, like when I've had Jesse Ventura on and a couple other people, and they want to use a landline, I can actually use Skype to call a landline. So
yeah,
it's nice if I want to continue using Skype, I could still call a landline if need be. But yeah, I mean, there's what else I want to talk to the NBA ref, Tim. Yeah. I mean, what do you think he's full of shit, or do you think a lot of what he's saying is legitimate?
I think he's a legitimate whistleblower. I really do. I mean, I think he kind of couches kind of what happened with him and the bookie and all that when he basically got busted by the FBI because, he didn't actually get investigated or arrested or convicted for fixing games. I mean, a lot of people who around that situation believe he did do that he was involved in fixing games and was making certain calls because of the betting that was going on. But because he wasn't investigated or convicted for that, I think he tries to avoid that subject matter. But I think, here's a guy who's a 13-year NBA referee. He knew how the system operated. And he would still be in the NBA right now if it wasn't for the FBI. I mean, that's the scary part. I mean, the NBA didn't catch him. They actually rated him as one of their highest ranked. I think he was a top 3 referee in their league. So, I mean, here's a guy who really did know how the system operated. Then once he got busted, then I think, in a way, he really turned into a whistleblower. It's just the media, ESPN and the like, basically said, oh, well, he's a convicted felon. You can't believe anything that comes out of his mouth because it was going to affect their bottom line and their investment into the NBA and that sort of thing. So I actually believe the guy when he talks about how the league talks to referees and gets them to sway games when they need him to. Because I've heard from other people around the sport who have said kind of the same thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like you said, to be in the NBA for 13 years, he obviously has seen and heard some stuff. And to think that all of a sudden he became if he was such a bad person, why didn't they fire him or why didn't, it's like he was in there for 13 years. Now all of a sudden he's a crazy person. Something just didn't seem right. And yeah.
And the NBA, I just say the NBA, I love their response to that. They did what they called a compliance review of all their officials after the Donahue thing. And I forget what there was. There's like 47 NBA referees. And they found that something like 42 of the 47 willingly admitted that they broke the collective bargaining agreement with the NBA and engaged in various forms of gambling. And instead of punishing, suspending, firing any of those guys, the NBA decided to rewrite the rules to allow them to do what they were doing. I mean, that's how legitimate the NBA is.
And that was public?
Yeah, it was made public. Just, again, nobody really covered it, but you can look up the report online. I have a copy of it somewhere. I mean, that's legitimate. The NBA rewrote their collective bargaining agreement with the NBA referees to allow them to gamble on certain things, allow them to go to casinos and that sort of stuff, which was all beforehand not legal according to their contract.
Well, yeah, Jordan got in trouble some people believe when he left,
he was suspended. I know that.
Yeah.
He's retired. He had a gambling problem, but he was McDonald's, he was Nike, he was so much money to so many people, they couldn't let him go down that Pete Rose road.
Well, yeah.
And he's one of those guys, like you were talking about before, like Iverson. He's one of those guys that he was protected by the media, completely protected by the media, and in reality, he is a total scumbag.
Scumbag. Oh, absolutely. I mean, so many people that I know that have met him And like I said, right next to I'm right next to the Basketball Hall of Fame. So sometimes when they have Travis Best is from Springfield, which is right next door, and so he hangs out here, throws parties and stuff like that in Springfield. And sometimes you'll run into, during these ceremonies, you'll run into some NBA players. And one thing you constantly hear about Jordan is that everybody consistently says he's a dick, and it just seems like everybody. And you saw it when he was put in the Basketball Hall of Fame. You had John Stockton, who was the most modest of guys, said this beautiful speech congratulating everybody. Then you had Jordan, who just like, oh, my poor kids have to walk in my shoes, and that's so weird.
I know, you're gonna have a hell of a time editing this thing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but I was thinking that too. That's the only time I'm like, I really don't mind if it cuts out or whatever. We usually can get back in conversation. But the only thing I'm always like, fuck, man, I'm gonna have to edit all this. But the Jordan thing. Another interesting thing is that how I had a buddy of mine. This was a while ago. This was before the Charlotte Bobcats turned into the Charlotte Hornets. And I had a buddy of mine at the gym who said he had inside information. A buddy who worked for Charlotte or worked for New Orleans, and said that Jordan wants the Hornets name because that will obviously the Bobcats were doing really poorly. They weren't making a lot of money. They obviously were doing an awful job. He was doing an awful job drafting players and stuff like that and trading players. So, he's like, he wants a Hornets name. He thinks he'll bring back that pizzazz of people love the Hornets. They love the logo, this and that, and will help with the fan base. And I'm like, well, how are they going to do that? They got the New Orleans Hornets. He's like, well, first they're going to change the New Orleans Hornets name. Then the Hornets name will be available, and I'm like, I don't know, man, that sounds a little far-fetched. So like a year later, all of a sudden you hear the Pelicans, and I remember telling my wife this. I'm telling you this just in case I forget, and so I have one person who believes me that I was told this. So and then the New Orleans Hornets are like, oh, we're in New Orleans now, so we're gonna end up changing our name to the Pelicans. Randomly, kind of out of nowhere, they just decided to change their name, it seems, and then randomly, of course, the Charlotte Bobcats turns into the Hornets. So I'm like, that was just another example of like, wow, man, these guys publicly will tell you whatever, but privately it's all about bottom line.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'm sure that goes on that, again, that doesn't get reported on, that doesn't get broadcast, that doesn't make the public news until much later. And I mean, that's what always frightens me about sports media too, is the fact that these guys, these beat reports and stuff, willingly self-censor themselves because they know if they write or produce the wrong story, wrong in the team's eyes or a player's eyes, they can get banned from the locker room. They can lose access to the team and effectively unemploy themselves just by writing something that they maybe shouldn't have written, at least again in the team's eyes. And I mean, that's a problem with sports media, and I think that's a problem why a lot of this idea of game fixing doesn't even make the conversation, is because you can't talk about this subject matter because it's basically taboo, because anything that, like the NFL always says, affects the integrity or doesn't protect the shield, you can't have that out there because that's going to affect the bottom line. It all comes down to business, unfortunately, despite the fact that people think it's sports. It all comes down back to business.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and even I think 30 for 30 did a documentary on the BC mob gambling. Yeah, so I mean that was public knowledge. I mean, players were obviously taking money from the mob and fixing.
You know how that came out, right? I mean, that came out on accident.
Really?
I mean, that's the funny thing is, what happened was it's basically Goodfellas. The movie Goodfellas is about I can't think of the guy's name now. The mobster.
Yeah,
Henry Hill.
Yeah.
Henry Hill is the one involved in fixing the games. And when he basically turned himself into the FBI and was going to become an informant and join the witness protection program, he was being interviewed and talking about this, that, and the other thing. And he said, well, I was up in Boston at the time of this. And they said, well, what were you up in Boston for? And he said, well, I was working with some of the college players there on these basketball games. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, well, we were, basically fixing these games. And the FBI is like, wait a second, what do you mean? And that's how it all came out.
Wow.
Otherwise, he had any clue that had happened, except that he let it slip in an interview that it had occurred. And it just so happened that the FBI agent who was interviewing Hill went to Boston College and was an alum. And so he really flipped out about it, and that's what spurred the whole investigation. And that's the scary part with a lot of these college investigations that have come out recently, is they're based off of something else. it's not just strictly we found information that guys are gambling on, or fixing these games at the college level. It's because they were doing an investigation like into marijuana that they found out about the University of San Diego and the game fixing going on there. So, I mean, all these things have come out almost on accident. And so, like you said at the beginning of the show, there's all this corruption within soccer that we could see all around the world. And yet here in the United States, we think it doesn't happen or can't happen. That's the scary part. Many fans, even sports media guys, think it just can't happen. And I'm like, look around, man. Cricket, India is completely corrupted. That's national sport. Rugby in Australia is corrupted in match fixing. I mean, like you say, World Cup events, World Cup soccer, the biggest sporting event in the world. We know matches have been fixed in the World Cup. And yet you don't think a regular season NBA game can be rigged, or a college, Final Four game or something like that can be rigged? Wake up. It's everywhere around the world, but supposedly not here in the United States, despite the fact that 98% of the gambling being done on these games is done illegally and underground and in organized crimes control. But believe what you want.
Well, that's the thing. There's so much money invested in it, and then just the money that they make off gambling is just ridiculous. And I mean, like you said, that was just BC. I mean, obviously Boston College is a pretty big college, but the money involved isn't nearly as much as the people who, like you said, Final Four, bet on the Final Four, or professional sports. I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of people who bet on these games. I mean, sometimes even friends that I've had for years, sometimes will be talking about a game, like, oh, I put money down on that game. And I'm like, really? You bet on games? They're like, yeah, just on the side. So it's like you forget how popular it is. Like, we always assume like gamblers or sports gamblers are always these like addicts who like spend all their money doing it. But a lot of people do it casually. I'll throw a couple bucks on here or throw a couple bucks on there, and why not? So I think it happens much more when there's that much money involved. I mean, look at almost, like you said, almost all aspects of life. Everything from medicine, healthcare to wars and military and foreign policy to everything, like anything that where unions. I mean, anything that where money's involved, there's corruption. So what makes you think that sports, which there's tons of money involved, there's zero corruption?
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, you mentioned too earlier about especially in the college level, the players who go out there in front of 100,000 fans. How many millions watching at home, the coach is being paid millions of dollars, fans are wearing the kid's jersey, and the kid's not making any money. And so how easy would it be to step up to that kid and say, look, I'll give you 10 grand and you just shave a few points in this game. Don't lose the game. You don't have to lose the game. Or if you're the bad team, make sure you don't cover the point spread. You're going to lose anyway. You're going to lose by 20 points as it is. Just make sure it's 22 points and not 18, because that's where the point spread is. How hard would it be to corrupt a kid who knows he's not NBA bound, who knows he's not NFL bound yet, but he's a starting varsity player who's playing in major games? And yet, how easy would it be to approach that kid and get him to shave points or throw a game for a few grand? Because the guy who's going to be betting, he's going to be betting 50 or 100 grand or something like that. He's going to make a return on his money. Because again, illegal gambling in the United States, they estimated anywhere from basically $100 to $500 billion a year.
Wow.
I mean, it's a huge amount of money. Even if it's $100 billion, that's 4 times more than the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and NHL make combined. And yet nobody thinks that money can affect or influence any of these games they're watching. Again, I'm the conspiracy theorist because I think this. No, I think I'm rightfully skeptical about the true integrity of these sports and these games that we're watching every week.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, a skeptic kind of gets same thing like conspiracy theorists gets a bad rap. I think skeptic does too. I think most skeptics are really debunkers. They're just trying to debunk other people's theories, and I think then that's the reason why sometimes people think of a skeptic and they're like, oh, that person he doesn't believe the alternative theory or perspective, and I really don't think skeptic. That's really what the definition of the term. I think it really is somebody who questions, either the official story or the alternative story, but you're being a skeptic to the story. So yeah. So I think skeptic would be the proper word, and I think even most conspiracy theorists are skeptics. I mean, that's what they are. They're skeptics to the official story. You don't believe that JFK was assassinated by one gunman. You don't believe that the government did everything in their power to prevent 9/11. You don't. It's like they're just, you're just questioning something. And I think that, and it goes way back to the CIA. They're the ones who kind of tainted the word conspiracy theorist and threw it out there to put everybody in one group and make them look like tinfoil hat wearing crazy people. But yeah, so it's been an awesome conversation. It's fun because I really don't get to talk about sports often, and a lot of times it's because, I'll be honest, like sometimes I just feel guilty even watching it, because I'm just like, this shit's so meaningless. I'll have a podcast about a big pharma or something like that, and like the corruption that's going on in there, and how awful our overprescribed healthcare system is, and then I'm going and watching sports, which is just meaningless, and yet there's other things that are going on, that people's lives are in danger, and there's corruption and real conspiracy. So it's just but I think that what you're doing is important, because it really is interesting how you're the only one doing it. You're the only, it's crazy. Like you're the leading expert, and there are no other experts.
Because no one wants to talk about it. I mean, that's the thing is, like you say, sports is seemingly meaningless, but I mean, just from doing the research and writing that I've done, I've seen pushback from like ESPN and other media outlets that won't cover the subject. And I'm thinking, they're not necessarily censoring me. They're just not allowing me to be on their programs or talk about this openly. But I'm thinking, if they're stopping me from talking about the potentiality for fixing in sports, well, what else are they stopping that's more important? Like you say, what stories about big pharma or the government or religion or whatever aren't they allowing to come out, because they have the power over us to, what we see and hear? I mean, they literally do control what we see and hear. And it's like, if they can do this about sports and something that is really, in the grand scheme of things, pretty meaningless, what else can they do? Because I've seen it firsthand. I've witnessed it. I've felt it. And I know that it's true that they will make sure that certain stories, certain voices aren't heard. Oh,
yeah, you see it all the time. I mean, propaganda is, we've talked about Edward Bernays on the show, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and just the power of propaganda and the power of influencing people's decisions and the way they think and the way they feel and what they desire, all based on what's put on TV. It's almost like that old movie Network. It's
relevant today too. That's scary.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's super relevant today, which is, it almost makes more sense today than it did when it was created. A great old film, and really the he called it the Tube. Nobody calls it a Tube anymore, but the Tube tells you how to what to eat and how to dress, and we believe everything that's on the Tube, and it's true. I mean, people they're easily brainwashed, and a lot of times we've created a society where we're so busy with work and kids and priorities and responsibilities that we don't have time to do research. We don't have time, or the average person doesn't have time to do research. They don't have time to look into things. So whatever ESPN tells them, or whatever CNN tells them, or whatever, then that's their news for the day, and that's what they believe, and that tends to mold what they think and their outlook on things. And we don't teach critical thinking anymore. We don't, there's so many issues, and I think, and then that's what makes the future a little scary, and I think that having the internet is awesome, because there's this young generation that can look up things, and they can hear about some of the scandals you've talked about on the show and easily Google them while they're listening to the show, and get more information. So I think, look what happened in Penn State. Another example of another college that was kind of hiding what was going on for the purpose of, all the money that they made, but really colleges become like cult-like. It's amazing how those kids supported him even after it was public knowledge that they were hiding a scandal, and the fact that these colleges still, because they didn't want to taint the legacy of Joe Paterno, and it's just, it's amazing. It's almost cult-like. It's like a religion, or like you talked about, we won the game, or it's same thing with politics, same thing with it's like, oh, we got to win this election, it's like, who's we? You think they give a shit about you? It's like, so it just, it's this group thinking, and it's this tribalism that still exists in us that I think is a little dangerous, because people jump into this group. And you were a sports fan, that's why you got into this, and just as well as I do, it's like, it's okay to fight about sports, so we can argue about who's better, who should have won the Super Bowl, the Pats or the Giants, all day. but yet you can't talk about religion or politics. You can't talk about actual issues that probably matter. You know, you can't talk about what's really going on in the world, because then we'll fight. Well, we fight about sports all day, and that's acceptable. And I wonder how much of that saying is because, or whoever pushed that saying upon us, that you never bring up politics or religion in a family get together or whatever, is because they want us to keep talking about the meaningless instead of the meaningful. You know.
Well, I mean, like, they put the gladiator contests on in Rome to distract the people. The NFL and the NBA do the same thing today. You just don't realize it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So definitely check out his website. Follow him on Twitter. What's the Twitter handle? It's
Fixes in Tuohy, but nobody can spell Tuohy. So the best place to go, just go to my website, thefixesin.net, and you can find all the other stuff there.
Yeah, check it all out. It's awesome. His books are available everywhere, and I know you even have one. I haven't read it, but I saw the title of it. It's something about government.
Disaster government.
What's that about?
Continuity government. Well, it's disaster government, continuity government, national emergencies, and you. And that's a completely different subject. But yeah, it's all about basically the plans the government made in the event of a quote unquote disaster or national emergency, and basically how they can legally overthrow the constitutional government through these emergency proclamations.
I'll have to have you back on to talk about that, because that seems interesting. Yeah.
Yes, it's a different subject matter, completely different subject matter, which is why I wrote about it, because after a while, sports just kind of made my explode.
Oh, I'm sure. That's the only thing about, sometimes I have people on, they're expert in some, JFK assassination or music or whatever, and it's fun to kind of get them off topic sometimes, because you realize, like, they are a little bit tired sometimes talking about the same thing, and a lot of times you just subconsciously have the same answers because you've been asked the same question so many times. So I think sometimes it's a relief trying. That's why I say, like, once the conversation, the call starts, the conversation starts, and that way we have a flowing conversation, and hopefully, and sometimes you get off track, and those are the conversations that are really fun, the ones that you're talking about something completely different than what you assumed you're going to talk about, so but thanks a lot, Brian. I really appreciate you taking time on this Labor Day weekend to be on the show. I'll send you all the links once it's up and live, and feel free to share it or post it or upload it wherever you would like. And so thanks again, Brian. Really appreciate it. Had a fun conversation.
Good luck putting this all together after all those interruptions.
yeah. I'll have you more bags under my eyes. Yeah. But it's gonna be the audio will be easy, and then it's just linking it with the video and all that stuff. So
it's like
but thanks, Brian. Hey, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and tell your wife get better soon. I'm sure.
Yeah, congratulations on the baby.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is one's a journey, but two is crazy. Yeah. So
it's man to man. It's not zone anymore. You gotta.
Oh my God. Yeah. I did a podcast yesterday, and I've been kind of not lazy, but there's been so much going on, I haven't been able to do them. And I'm like, I scheduled 2 this week. I'm like, this is perfect. And yesterday I did a podcast with like 3 hours of sleep, and today I just feel, I'm like, finally our daughter slept decent last night, so I'm like, I got a little bit of sleep, I feel good, so but yeah, I mean, now it's like I get anxiety because I'm like, what if I have a podcast in the morning and I didn't get any sleep that night, I'm like, I'm not going to cancel because it's like, hey, sorry to be a pussy, but I'm going to have to cancel because I didn't get any sleep, so because you never know, obviously I'm assuming that the guest that I have on has gotten all their sleep, but it's quite possible they have shit going on, they have lives. I mean, so it's not
exactly.
like, yeah, you never know. So it's like, I mean, you're on Coast to Coast AM. I'm sure, that you didn't get the best of sleep, before or after that. Well, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll definitely have you on again soon.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Hey, take care.
Bye.